So first of all, I live in DC, and I used to live in New York, and I don't know if any of you have left New York recently, but you should really come back sometime, because there's nothing more amazing than coming back to New York. So it's really, really exciting to be back and to share a little bit of my story with you guys. Before I talk about me and before I talk about the digital service, I'd like for you guys to meet somebody. This is Lizzie. Lizzie is a mother. She lives with her family in Chicago, and she's an Army veteran. I met Lizzie last year when I was traveling around the country talking to veterans who use services provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs. She's actually a friend of mine, which is how I met her. Lizzie uses a service that many young people who've been in our military use called the GI Bill. It allows people to help pay for school. Maybe some of you have held your school finance this way through yourself or your family. Lizzie is our age. She accesses the internet just like the rest of us. She needs modern digital tools. And when she goes to use them, they look a little bit like the early 90s. They're a little difficult to navigate. They're hard to understand. But more importantly, things go wrong behind the scenes. Lizzie was trying to just pay for her education. Once a month, she goes to a website and enrolls in the services that she needs and pays off her monthly debt. And one day she got a phone call from a collections agency that let her know that she hadn't been paying her bill properly for the last 6 months, and her credit score was about to plummet. As a single mother, this had a huge impact on her, and she had no idea what was going on. She tried to contact the VA. She tried to contact her school. She couldn't get in touch with anybody. Nobody knew how to help. She couldn't find phone numbers. She couldn't find resources. Now, this sounds like a thorny problem. This sounds like maybe something for Congress or policymakers. It turns out it's actually a problem for designers. So let's put our design hat on for a minute here. Let's talk about how each of these three things come in contact with Lizzie's experience. From the service design perspective, we're talking about someone who's having touch points with a service at many places. They're picking up the phone, they're using a website, they're getting things in the mail. We need to provide consistency and uniformity across the board. From a user experience and UI perspective, she's touching websites and mobile phones, and what she's expecting is not what she's seeing. It looks like something, that was from 20 years ago. She uses the same apps and tools like just the rest of us. And then there's the content. There's the words that she has to interact with. The stuff is written like it's designed for lawyers and people with high education degrees. She just needs to know what she's trying to accomplish and have clear information. These are probably very similar things that many of you come in contact with on a daily basis in the kind of jobs that you have. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about why it's a little different in government. So we're designing for Lizzie. We're trying to understand her experience. But it turns out we're also designing for these guys and these guys. And as a result of that, there's a huge number of what some people would call obstacles, other people would call challenges, some would call opportunities, and as designers, we call constraints. So I wanted to let you guys a little bit behind the curtain of what it takes to do design for good user experience in government. So let's start with our first one, with service design. So in the private sector, we can often have the opportunity to look at things sort of like customer drop-off and conversion channels and things like that. We certainly have analytics and information about how users are interacting with our services, but one of the fundamental differences between government services and private sector products is sort of the market incentive. At the end of the day, many of you who work for companies know that you have this bottom line. If you don't get your customers in the door, then your company is going to fail. At the end of the day, if Lizzie's unhappy, Lizzie doesn't have a choice. Lizzie has to use the government service. So one of the fundamental problems with sort of fixing the delivery and the experience of services is that we have to convince the government that it's in their best interest to do so. That gets extra tricky because we have a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to interact with the government. Most likely, you probably went through many, many websites, many, many phone numbers, went to many different offices. This is sort of a little audit somebody did recently of websites, phone numbers, call centers, and databases at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So the number's a little bit high. And this is a reflection of what the inside looks like, which is extremely siloed. Different organizations talking to, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And so that makes providing consistency and fluidity across experiences very, very difficult. on to the next set of constraints, the UX and UI side. As user experience designers, we can't just walk out into the street and ask anybody we want for any kind of information from them. There is a particular regulation that means we have to get permission from the government before we can collect data on somebody. So things like screeners, if you're gonna have something pop up on your website to get sort of user experience or quantitative data about somebody, you first have to go through an extremely rigorous process, which many of my colleagues are doing some awesome work to kind of hack and make work a little bit better. So that's one step that slows people down along the way. Another one, which comes up time and time again, is actually extremely important, has to do with accessibility for people with disabilities. As visual designers, we often sort of neglect to think about the implications of our colors and our fonts, and as front-end developers, the way that we code some of our websites. It turns out that if we're going to do this in a way that's very easy for people of all abilities, the options available to us are much more constrained. So to demonstrate this, I thought I'd show you a couple random products that many of us come in contact with. Sorry if any of you work on any of these. So this is the new Apple Music site. Beautiful website, lots of moving things behind the scenes. There's a regulation called 508 standards. That's sort of what guides and determines how accessible things have to be for end users, people with all disabilities and all abilities. And one of the things it has to do with is color contrast. So unfortunately, by the standards of 508, everything on pink and white would fail. The contrast is not strong enough between these things. Here we have beautiful Airbnb. If this was their website, slowly this person would start to move in their bed. It would be cool and creepy. Unfortunately, we can't write text over top of images. That's something that provides difficult, especially if they start moving. That's just generally weird. But and the same thing, sort of the color contrast between how it works, the words that are written there, and the shape of the button behind them. Something that I never had thought about before I started in the government, stops me every day on my tracks. And last one, okay, these guys must know what they're doing, right? They're like, the cutting edge, bleeding envelope. Turns out even on bright colors, sometimes this color contrast issue comes up, and it really means that we have to be extremely creative and find things that are still beautiful, that are still accessible and enjoyable, but are available to everybody, so we're not leaving anybody out of the experience. So let's go on to the last one, and this is a particularly tricky one. This is the words. It's incredibly difficult to write language that we often call sort of plain language, the things, and there's so much written and so much talked about nowadays about sort of content strategy and speaking like you're talking to your friends, and putting emojis in your subject lines and things like that. As the government, we have so many different sort of stakeholders to think about. It's not just the people it's not just Izzy, it's not just the one person who's going to be receiving the service, it's everybody else that might read the thing as well. So that's the legal community, that's the press, that's Congress. They really put a clamp down on things. And so when we have websites that seem extremely hard and extremely dense to get through, part of that is because we have to account for every single possible person that might read the thing. And it's really tricky as a designer because you just want to be like, I don't want to tell them all the things. But you have to tell them all the things and all the cases and all the variables and all the possible routes that they have to go through. Because at the end of the day, somebody might need that. And that's the whole point. So you guys are probably wondering right now, A, how I'm going to turn this into a recruiting pitch, which I am, and B, why anybody would ever want to do this. It is hard. It's extremely hard. And it's very difficult when you're in the midst of the bureaucracy and you're in the midst of all the red tape to remember why you're here. But this is why we're here. We're here for Izzy. We're here for her daughter and her mother and her friends. And we're here because as a community, we've said this is the way that our government's supposed to work, and we're not doing such a good job of following through on that. So that sort of is the lead-in to how the group that I work for, called the US Digital Service, came to be. The U.S. Digital Service is working to help transform how the government works for the American people. We focus largely on technology and design. We are not the only people doing this. We're part of a bigger movement. Fast Company recently wrote a really cool piece on this. If you're curious, yes, I am back there. Yes, someone did stand in front of me. Yes, I am angry about it. The guy with the tie, I can tell you his name and his Facebook profile. This is an incredible community. It's kind of a movement right now of people who have fellowships and internships, policy offices, digital design shops, people within agencies, people on the inside and outside, coming together to sort of make the civic experience of government work better. To show you a little bit about what that looks like, I thought I'd walk you through an example of a project that a couple of the different actors in this space have been working on. An issue that's like kind of not that big a deal, light, not too political, immigration. So we tend to think about immigration in this very politicized sort of, you know, who's allowed to do what is Congress doing, this, that, and the other. It turns out there's an incredible amount that we can do for the people who are trying to come into this country, stay in this country, get jobs, see their families, just by improving the experience of the service that we're trying to deliver. And we've been tackling this issue sort of from two sides, both from the inside, the tools that people in government are using to process immigration applications, and also the experience that end users, the people applying, are having on the outside. So I thought I'd show you a little bit about what that looks like. So right now, if you are, and I imagine there are many people in this audience who have, trying to get some sort of immigration status or reapply for something, you're inundated with this sort of laundry list of forms. They look like this. They look like every other government form. They suck. They're usually about like 60 pages deep. And the result is that the agency, the government, has stacks and stacks and stacks of paper they have to process. You might have heard a couple years ago of a story at the VA where like a roof was falling in because there was so much paper. That is unfortunately extremely realistic. I've seen some of those places. But we're trying to move things away from being about forms and about paper to being about people who are moving through these systems. So this is a little bit about how design can be helpful for that challenge. So this is my colleague. Last fall, we were trying to help the organization redesign the system, which is entirely paper-based, to being more of a digital process. And we traveled around the country to service centers where people are adjudicating these applications, sort of reviewing them. And we watched them pick the stacks of paper up and move them around. And then based on that, we did what any good user research and UX folks would do, which is we prototyped. You would have thought we had invented the moon. These people had never seen anything like this. They were so excited to be included in the process. I think design is like an incredibly powerful tool in these contexts because it's so different from what people are used to seeing, used to working with. And for them to be able to see an iterative process, which is incredibly intuitive for all of us, was really powerful and really moving experience. So while we're on the inside trying to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of these systems, a team called 18F, which is kind of like a digital agency inside the government, has been working on the outside. So this is kind of what your standard, you know, plain overwhelming amount of text sort of dumped at you looks like right now. And they've said, let's totally blow this up. Let's turn it on its head. Let's make this look modern and beautiful and something that people would actually want to use. So they went through sort of what is the human process of applying for things? What do people need? What does the user need along the way? And the end result is an absolutely gorgeous website, which is live on the internet today, myuscis.gov, that answers people's questions, that's designed to be warm and welcoming. It has the face of people on it, and it answers people's questions. It's written in such a way that people of different languages can understand it. It's also designed to work in a couple different languages as well. And it's tailored to lots of different needs that people have. It was a partnership that started with the firm IDEO and has extended on inside the government. So it's a really incredible story of what civic design is starting to look like these days. Luckily, that's not the only website. There's a number of awesome things. We have tools for everything from people looking for retirement savings to improving the way you request access to information that the government is holding, information for people who are survivors of sexual assaults and ways to donate and support work at the Peace Corps. I'm really excited. This is a preview of a project that I'm working on, which sort of follows on to the previous talk, which is that we're creating our own sort of design standards, design guide for inside of government. So that will be coming out soon. There's an incredible amount more to do, and design is an incredibly powerful tool. If you are interested, we need you. I told you I turned into a recruiting pitch. We need designers left and right of all skills and all backgrounds. You don't necessarily have to move to DC, but I've survived, so I'm happy to tell you about that. If you're interested, I encourage you to think about how you can be helpful in taking on some of the hardest challenges, how your skill set could be useful here. And there's a couple websites for you to look at. These are just a couple of the folks doing this work inside the government today, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit more about it.
So question for you, who's the coolest politician you've met?
I don't get to hang out with the fancy people. Okay, the coolest person that I met probably is, so the immigration work is actually very near and dear to my heart, and one of the people who works at the Obama administration's name is Cecilia Munoz, and she's one of sort of the leading immigration rights activists. And I had a chance to present some of our work in front of her, and she said, "That looks cool." So that was awesome.
That's awesome. All right, questions?
Hi, thank you. So I spent about 3 years of my life doing similar work at the state level, so just to give you some context for my questions. And one of the problems we faced is that we didn't have the resources of the federal government, and we were hamstrung by hiring freezes and regulations, and honestly, we couldn't get people like you. So we were very often faced with the build or buy problem. And when we bought stuff, we were hamstrung by other regulations. So I guess the first part of my question is, how do you potentially roll out the same principles and the same practices to the 50 states which have all of their own websites and even the municipal level, because that's a huge level at which people interact? And how have you faced or solved the build versus buy problem when you've encountered it?
Yeah, so our work is focused primarily on the federal government, but we know that the role that we play is something that's very visible elsewhere. So a lot of what we do, this applies to all the different organizations. We have an extremely strong stance on building in the open, and almost everything that we create is open source. So that's part of it, is we're creating things that tools that can be reused at the local level. So a really concrete example was earlier this year, we released kind of an analytics dashboard for the federal government, so you could see traffic at any point across the federal government, all federal government websites. I know it doesn't sound that innovative, but it was a big deal. And the city of Philadelphia repurposed it and you just sort of forked it and used it for themselves, which is awesome. So that's part of how we can help. There's also a lot of organizations who do work more closely on the local level. One of them is called Code for America, which is focused on building that capacity from sort of the cities up. I think that, frankly, without getting too into it, one of the things that's really compelling about this work is about efficiency and effectiveness, and so it's very compelling across party lines, and it often results in cost savings, and like a little initial upfront spending gives you savings in the long run. So that's something that's been, I'm not really answering your question about the 50 states, I know that. So the other question was about buy versus build. We are very, very aware that in spite of the fact that we're hiring hundreds of people, the federal government is far, far, far bigger than, and has way more work to be done than we could possibly influence by just hiring awesome folks in the private sector. And a lot of our groups are focused on fixing the way that the government procures or buys technology and buys services. A lot of the problems with the maintenance have to do with the way that stuff is structured. I'm not going to geek out on that right now, but generally speaking, we're trying to make it easier for like small businesses and organizations who have a track record of designing and delivering good work to be able to participate, so that we are able, when we do have to buy things, that we can do it in a way that is smart and awesome.
You spoke about...
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll just be loud. So you spoke about using a lot of languages. It's obviously a nationwide site. How did you manage all of the translations for the countless pages of information that were displayed?
So I didn't work directly on that project, so I can't speak to it too much, but my understanding is that it's originally designed in 2 languages, and then they've sort of, in iterative releases, been adding more languages in, and some agencies have a lot of language translation services built in because they serve so many different language speakers. So they'll either provide that, or they'll also sort of contract out that service for everything to be translated, but it's a huge amount of work, 'cause it's a ton of content.
Is this on? Okay, great. So I saw the slide where you were doing your awesome contextual research and kind of a service design type of capacity. Have you had any challenges getting access to users? You talked about some of the regulations and some of the red tape that may inhibit that. How has that affected your research?
In terms of actually getting access to users, our experience mostly has been that people are really excited to help fix really badly broken things and have a lot of feedback. So actually finding people in and of itself tends not to be that difficult. It varies project to project. The red tape specifically applies to this one regulation that says you're not allowed to ask more than 9 people the same set of closed-ended questions. And what's interesting about that is that that is not qualitative research. That's not contextual inquiry, but government has misinterpreted it. And so for many, many years, that stood as a barrier for people getting out in the field and doing qualitative research. And we've just recently been able to sort of flip that around and do some myth busting so that people can more readily get out in the world. But it does still apply to things like a screener, for example. You do still have to, it basically slows down your process, though usually you're able to come out the other end and still do the work.
Hi, how are you dealing with the fact that in a while we're going to have an election and change of government may actually affect anything connected to Obama?
It's a very good question. So part of the reason that we are many different organizations is for that purpose, sort of intentionally. The group that I work for is part of the White House and connected to the administration, but many other parts of the work is not. And they're funded in different ways, and they are able to continue on in a way that's detached from the administration. So that's part of the hope, is that we're able to staff up teams and have them on the field and running and moving, so that by the point that the administration changes, they're sort of well on their way and disconnected. I think the other thing is to prove that it's worthwhile. We might work on some issues that are kind of political, but at the end of the day, it's about making government work better for everybody. And so if we're able to sort of demonstrate the value of investing in this, our aspiration is that that's something that both sides of the aisle can see. I think the biggest risk is that people like undoing other people's legacies. So hopefully we'll be able to plant the seeds enough that that will continue on.
So I'm going to guess that a lot of the people you work with on a fairly regular basis haven't had a lot of experience with experienced designers, service designers, and just design practice in general. A lot of organizations, when they start up this kind of change, will create an internal innovation lab that does a lot of internal education. Is there anything along those lines? Is there a team that sort of does that within this context to sort of, preach?
Yeah, we're that team. The attempt to do this inside the federal government is not the first time it's been tried. This is kind of the, pivot 3 or 4 in startup language. The earlier versions did look more like sort of traditional innovation labs. And one of the things that we found is that the problem is that then that energy gets sort of siloed in a corner, and that people who actually were doing the work on a daily basis were not really directly connected to a lot of that ideas, and they were like, oh, just call the design people sometimes, versus like thinking of themselves in those roles and adopting the framework and methodology. And so we, in various permutations, work directly with agencies. We often work in their offices. They are often our teams. We are often their teams. And that has been the most effective means of having people, it's culture change, having people adapt and learn new stuff.
All right, Mollie, thank you very much.